There is a kind of cruelty that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a raised fist or a loud voice. It comes quietly, dressed in wealth, wrapped in a smile, disguised as a favor. And by the time you recognize it for what it has already cost you everything. This is a story about a woman named Clara, a maid, a mother, a woman who, on one ordinary Thursday morning, made a split-second decision that saved a little girl's life. She didn't think twice. She didn't ask for a reward. She just acted the way good people do when everything inside them says this is the right thing. And yet, that one act of pure, selfless courage set off a chain of events so painful, so deeply unfair, that when you hear it, you will find yourself asking, how can the world work this way? And if you're watching this right now, I want you to stay, because this story does not end where you think it will. And by the time we reach the final chapter, you may find yourself thinking about your own life, your own choices, and the kind of person you truly want to be. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Let's go back to the beginning. Picture a Tuesday morning in a gated neighborhood just outside of Houston, Texas. The lawns are perfectly trimmed. The cars in the driveways are the kind you only see in showroom floors. The air itself feels different there, quieter, cleaner, like money has a way of keeping noise at a distance. Clara Reyes, 34 years old, single mother of two, has been cleaning houses in this neighborhood for 6 years. She knows every corner of this world, even though she has never truly belonged to it. She knows which families eat breakfast together and which ones eat alone. She knows which marriages are held together by appearances and which ones are barely held together at all. She's seen things, heard things, and she has always kept her head down, done her work, and gone home. But on this particular morning, something would happen that she could never have prepared for. Something that would pull her from the invisible background where she had lived her entire working life and place her, suddenly, violently, at the center of a story far bigger than herself. So here are the questions we need to sit with as this story unfolds. What really happened in that house that day? Why did Clara do what she did? And what exactly did it cost her? And why would a man who owed his daughter's life to this woman allow his wife to do what she did? Stay with me. Clara Reyes grew up in a small apartment in the East End of Houston, the middle child of 5. Her mother cleaned office buildings at night. Her father laid tile during the day. They were not poor in spirit. Her mother used to say that, but they were poor in everything else. The refrigerator was never quite full. The shoes Clara wore to school were always a season behind. But her parents worked. They worked harder than anyone she had ever known, and they raised their children to believe that dignity had nothing to do with money. Clara married at 26, a man named Marcus who fixed cars and made her laugh. For 3 years, it was good. Then Marcus got sick. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, the way some illnesses work, grinding a person down until one morning you wake up and realize the person you loved is more burden than partner, and you hate yourself for thinking it. He left when their second child, a boy named Darius, was barely a year old. He didn't die, he just left. And somehow that was harder. So Clara did what she knew. She cleaned. She got her own clients. She built a small list of homes in wealthy neighborhoods where people paid decent money to have someone else manage the mess of their lives. She was known for being thorough, for being honest, and for never touching anything she wasn't supposed to touch. Word got around. That's how she came to work for the Harmon family. Raymond Harmon was 47, self-made. At least, that was the story he told. He'd built a logistics company from 2 trucks and a borrowed office space into something worth close to $300 million. He was the kind of man who filled a room without trying, the kind whose confidence was so deep it came out as calm rather than noise. He had a second wife. His first marriage had ended badly. Everyone in the neighborhood knew, though no one said exactly how, and her name was Diane. Diane Harmon was 43, beautiful in the way that requires significant effort and significant money, and privately unhappy in the way that wealthy women sometimes are when they have everything they were told would make them happy and find that it doesn't. She was not cruel, exactly, in the beginning. She was sharp, watchful, the kind of woman who made you feel she was always measuring you against some standard she had never shared out loud. She had no children of her own. Raymond had one daughter from his first marriage, a 7-year-old girl named Sophie, who lived with them full-time. Sophie Harmon was small for her age, with bright eyes and the kind of laugh that made adults stop what they were doing and smile. She had her father's confidence and something else, a softness, a sensitivity, that Raymond clearly didn't know what to do with. She asked too many questions. She got attached to people easily. She liked Clara, in particular. On the days Clara came to clean, Sophie would follow her from room to room, asking about her children, asking about her life, asking things that children ask when they sense something honest in a person. Diane did not like this. She never said so directly, but there were small corrections. Sophie, let Clara do her work. Sophie, don't bother the help. Small words, small corrections. But Clara heard them for what they were. She was not a person in this house. She was a function. Still, Clara came. She needed the money. The Harmons paid well, and she had 2 children to feed, a car payment that was already 2 months behind, and a mother whose blood pressure medication was not cheap. So she came, every Tuesday and Friday morning, and she cleaned the bathrooms and the kitchen and the long hallway with the marble floors, and she was invisible, the way people like her are trained to be invisible in places like that. Until the morning, everything changed. It was a Thursday in early March. The Harmons had called Clara in for an extra session. They were hosting a dinner that weekend, and Diane wanted the house immaculate. Raymond had already left for the office. Diane was upstairs on a phone call. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Clara's mop against the kitchen tiles. Sophie was at the breakfast table, finishing a glass of orange juice. She'd been unusually quiet that morning. Clara noticed, the way she always noticed things, but she said nothing. She wasn't paid to ask questions. Then it happened. Clara was wringing out the mop near the kitchen sink when she heard it, a sound that wasn't quite a sound. It was more like an absence of sound, the absence of Sophie's small, constant movement. She turned. Sophie was still in her chair, but her body was wrong. Her head had dropped forward. Her hands were at her sides. And her lips, Clara saw it immediately. Her lips were turning blue. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Sophie's chair, tilted it back, opened the girl's mouth, and saw it. A piece of candy, lodged deep in the throat. Sophie had been sucking on a piece of hard candy and had inhaled it somehow, and now it was blocking everything. Clara did not call for Diane. She did not run to find a phone. She did the only thing there was time to do. She pulled Sophie from the chair, turned her over her knee, and delivered 5 sharp blows between the shoulder blades. The Heimlich maneuver for a child, the way she had been taught in a first aid class she'd taken years ago for her own children's safety. Nothing on the first blow, nothing on the second. On the third, she felt Sophie's body convulse. On the fourth, the candy shot out and hit the kitchen tiles with a small, terrible sound, and Sophie dragged in a breath so deep it sounded like a sob. Diane came running at the noise. She found Clara on the kitchen floor, holding Sophie against her chest, both of them shaking. Sophie was breathing. She was crying. She was alive. For a moment, just a moment, Diane Harmon stood in the doorway of her kitchen and looked at this woman on the floor holding her stepdaughter, and her face showed something complicated. Something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite something else. Then Raymond was called. He came home within the hour. The paramedics had already been, had cleared Sophie, had confirmed that Clara had done everything right. Without her response, they said, the outcome could have been very different. Raymond Harmon stood in the hallway of his house and looked at Clara with the kind of expression that wealthy men sometimes wear when they encounter something that doesn't fit their understanding of the world. He shook her hand. He said, I don't know how to thank you. He said it 3 times. He had tears in his eyes. But there is something important you need to understand about Raymond Harmon. He was a man who had built his life around control. Control of his business, control of his image, control of the narrative of his own story. And Clara, by saving Sophie in the most intimate and physical way possible, had stepped inside the story in a way that could not be edited out. She had held his daughter while she gasped for air. She had been closer to Sophie in that moment than he had been in weeks. That was a debt of the deepest kind. And men like Raymond Harmon are uncomfortable with debts they cannot easily repay. If you're still watching, drop in, I'm still watching, in the comments right now. I want to know who's here with us for this. In the days after the incident, the neighborhood talked. These things always get out. The housekeeper who saved the billionaire's daughter. There were phone calls, neighbors who stopped Clara in parking lots to tell her she was brave. One local news outlet reached out to the Harmon house. Raymond's assistant declined on their behalf. Raymond himself sent Clara a cash bonus of $5,000 and a handwritten note that said, simply, "For what you did. We are in your debt." Clara kept the note. She put it in the drawer beside her bed, next to a photograph of her children. She was grateful for the money. It covered her car payment and her mother's medication with enough left over for a small breathing room she hadn't had in years. She thought, perhaps, that the Harmons might become more than just clients. She thought about Sophie's laugh and how the little girl had squeezed her hand at the hospital door before Diane had guided her away. She thought about the way Raymond had looked at her that day, with something real, something human, in his eyes. She was not naive. She did not expect a friendship. She was not foolish enough to confuse gratitude with equality. But she hoped, quietly, carefully, that the thing that had happened between them would mean something lasting. That she would be treated differently, seen differently. That the invisible line between her world and theirs might, just slightly, have shifted. It had not shifted. It had only become a different kind of line. 2 weeks after the incident, Diane called Clara in for what she described as a routine check-in. Clara arrived at the usual time, on a Tuesday morning, wearing her work clothes, carrying her kit. Diane was in the living room, dressed as though she was about to go somewhere important, sitting with the kind of perfect posture that is itself a form of authority. The conversation was brief. Diane told Clara that, going forward, she would be assigned only to cleaning the guest wing and the garage area. She would no longer clean the kitchen, the main living spaces, or the family quarters. She would not be present during Sophie's time at home, and her hours would be reduced from 2 full days to a single half-day per week. The pay would be adjusted accordingly. Clara looked at Diane Harmon across the room and waited for more. There was no more. Diane smiled, the kind of smile that is a wall, not a door, and said, "We think this arrangement will work better for the family. Now, I need you to really sit with what just happened here." Clara had just saved this woman's stepdaughter's life. 2 weeks later, she is being pushed to the margins of the house, stripped of her primary duties, and handed a reduction that would cut her weekly income nearly in half. No explanation. No apology, just a smile and a closed door. How would you feel if that had been you? After everything you did, after being the reason a child was still breathing, to have that be the response. Take a moment and really imagine it. What would you do? Clara drove home that day in silence. She sat in her car in front of her apartment building for 20 minutes without going inside. Her son, Darius, was at school. Her daughter, Maya, was at her grandmother's. The street was quiet. And Clara sat in the gray afternoon light and felt the specific weight of being treated as though her humanity was only relevant until it was inconvenient. She did not cry. She had cried before, for harder things. She thought about quitting. She thought about what it would mean to her finances if she did. She thought about Raymond's note, still in the drawer beside her bed. She thought about Sophie. Then she picked up her phone and called her older sister, Renee. Renee was the kind of woman who solved things. She was practical, direct, the opposite of the quiet patience that Clara had always carried. Renee told her to call Raymond directly. "He gave you his card at the hospital?" Renee said. "Use it. Talk to the man directly. Don't go through her." Clara sat with that for a long moment. Then she said, "That's not how it works." And Renee said, "How what works?" And Clara said, "Being us, in their world." There was a silence between them. And then Renee said, quietly, "Then change the world you're in." That was a Wednesday night. By Friday, Clara had made a decision. She would not call Raymond. She would not beg. She would not perform gratitude to soften Diane's cruelty. She would accept the reduced hours, do her work with the same dignity she had always brought to it. And in the time she was reclaiming from the Harmons, she would do something she had been putting off for 4 years. She enrolled in an online certification program for medical first response training. The fee was $300, almost everything she had left over from Raymond's bonus. She paid it that same night, sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop and a cup of tea that had gone cold. She had decided that the skill that had saved Sophie's life, the skill no one had rewarded her for keeping, the skill she had carried quietly in her body like so many other things, was going to be the thing she built something real from. Not for the Harmons. For herself. 3 months passed. Clara completed her first certification. She began a second. She picked up 2 new clients to replace the income she had lost from the Harmon reduction. She was tired. Deeply, bone-tired in the way that single mothers in their 30s who are also studying and also grieving the steady accumulation of injustice are always tired. But she was moving forward, quietly, on her own terms. And then she got a call that she had not expected. It was Raymond Harmon's personal number. She recognized it because she had never deleted it from her phone. She didn't know why, exactly. She answered on the third ring. He told her that Sophie had been asking about her. That Sophie had told him what Diane had done. The reduction in hours, the reassignment, all of it. Apparently Sophie had overheard the conversation. She was 7 years old and had understood it in the way that children understand things. Not with complexity, but with a directness that cuts through all the adult pretending. Sophie had gone to her father and said, "Dad, Clara saved my life, and Mom took her job away. That's not right." Raymond said this to Clara on the phone, and there was something in his voice that she had never heard from a man like him before. Something that was not quite shame, but was close enough to it to matter. He asked her to come back. Full hours. Better pay. He said he had spoken to Diane. He said the conversation had not gone well, but that he was the one who made the financial decisions in the household, and he was making this one. He also told her something else, something that explained the shape of everything she had not understood. He told her that Diane had always been uncomfortable with Clara specifically, not because of anything Clara had done, but because Raymond had mentioned, early in their marriage, that his first wife had also grown up without money, had also worked with her hands, had also been the kind of woman who didn't need to be told what dignity looked like because she wore it every day. And Diane, insecure in ways that her wealth had never healed, had seen Clara and recognized something that threatened her in a way she could not quite name. So she had done what frightened, powerful people sometimes do. She had tried to make it small. Clara listened to all of this without interrupting. When Raymond finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "I appreciate you telling me that." Another pause. "But I won't be coming back." Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I understand." She did not say it with anger. She did not say it to punish him. She said it because it was true, because something had clarified for her in those 3 months that could not be unclarified. She was building something. And you cannot build something new in the same place that taught you your value was conditional. But the story does not end there. Because 2 weeks after that call, Clara received a certified letter. It was from a foundation, a small nonprofit that Raymond Harmon had established quietly, without publicity, in Sophie's name. The letter informed Clara that she had been selected as the inaugural recipient of a professional development grant for workers in home services and caregiving fields pursuing healthcare certifications. The amount was enough to cover 2 full years of training. There was no application process. She had simply been chosen. The letter was signed by Raymond. There was a handwritten line at the bottom in different ink, added separately, she could tell. It said, "Sophie asked me to make sure you knew." This was her idea. Clara read that line 3 times. Then she folded the letter, put it beside the first note in the drawer next to her bed, and sat for a long time in the quiet of her apartment. She thought about Sophie, 7 years old, small for her age, with eyes that saw things clearly. She thought about what it means when a child, who has grown up surrounded by everything, looks at a woman who has grown up with nothing and sees her as someone worth fighting for. She thought about Diane and found, to her own surprise, that the anger she had carried was already starting to loosen its grip. Not because Diane had earned forgiveness, but because Clara was tired of letting other people's smallness live rent-free in her chest. 18 months later, Clara Reyes was a certified emergency medical technician. She was working part-time for a local ambulance service and had reduced her cleaning work to 2 clients she genuinely liked. Her income was not dramatically different. Not yet, but the shape of her life had changed. She woke up in the morning with a sense of purpose that felt earned rather than borrowed. She and Sophie never lost contact entirely. Raymond would occasionally send updates through a mutual connection, a neighbor who still hired Clara. He remarried, eventually, after Diane left, another story for another time. Sophie grew into a girl who volunteered at the hospital where her stepmother had once made her feel small. One spring afternoon, when Sophie was 9, she and her father ran into Clara at a grocery store. Sophie ran to her and hugged her around the waist without hesitation, the way children do when they love someone without complication. Clara held her for a moment. Then she looked up at Raymond, and they exchanged the kind of look that doesn't need words. The look of two people who understand they are standing on the other side of something that nearly went much worse. Diane Harmon was gone from that story by then. She had moved to a different city, started over. No one who knew her well was surprised. And Clara continued. She was not famous. She was not wealthy. No one made a movie about her, or put her story on the front page of a newspaper. She was a woman who had grown up without much, who had worked hard, who had saved a child's life and been punished for it, who had refused to be broken by that punishment, and who had slowly, without fanfare, built something real from the ashes of someone else's cruelty. There is a thing she says now when she trains younger EMTs, young men and women who are just starting out, who want to know how to stay calm in an emergency. She tells them, the second you start thinking about what you'll get for doing the right thing, you've already slowed down. Do it first. Figure out the rest later. They always nod. Some of them have heard harder versions of this lesson already. Some of them are about to. And somewhere in a Houston suburb, in a drawer beside a woman's bed, there are 2 letters. One from a man who shook her hand and meant it. One that says, in a child's handwriting reproduced in the margin, "Thank you, Clara." She does not need them to remember what she's worth. But she keeps them anyway, because sometimes the world gets it right, just late, just a little, just enough. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. If you were Clara, if you had just saved a child's life with your own hands, and 2 weeks later the family reduced your hours and pushed you to the edges of their home, what would you have done? Would you have walked away immediately? Would you have fought back? Would you have called Raymond directly, the way Renee told Clara to? Or would you have done what Clara did? Gone quiet, gone inward, and started building something they couldn't take from you? And here's the harder question. Diane Harmon was not a monster. She was a frightened, insecure woman who reacted to someone else's goodness with cruelty because it held up a mirror she didn't want to look into. Have you ever met someone like that? Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing made someone else angry? Not because you did anything wrong, but because your goodness reminded them of something in themselves they couldn't face? These stories are everywhere. They happen in offices. They happen in families. They happen between neighbors, between colleagues, between people who share a house and have never truly shared the same world. And the question is never really what the Dianes of the world do. The question is always, what do the Claras of the world do next? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what moved you most. Tell me if you have a story like this, a time you were treated as less than you were worth, and what you did about it. I read every single comment, and I want to hear from you. And if this story touched something in you, if it made you think, made you feel, made you want to reach out to someone who helped you and never heard a proper thank you, please share it. Someone in your life needs to hear it today. And subscribe if you haven't already, because we have more stories coming. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories that will make you question everything you think you know about strength, about class, about what it really means to be a good person in a world that doesn't always reward you for it. The next story, I promise you, is even more powerful than this one. Stay close.